we are doing a disservice to the thousands of years of where women have fought to get to the very place where we are.
As a husband of a strong, powerful, intelligent, and capable woman who I have the privilege of walking alongside, and the father of a daughter, it's extremely important to me that we can have conversations like this with women, not just in spaces for women, but for all parties to hear.
Why am I getting such pushback? And the more successful I got, the only way I can describe it, the noose on my neck at home got tighter and tighter and tighter. When you allow yourself to step into your own light and into your story and to shine, you spread hope, you spread opportunity.
What do you think is the greatest opportunity for people to explore and refine and find their own voices?
It starts with being willing to wonder again.
Welcome back, everybody, to Flipping the Lid. As you know, we dive deep here. We get into the real, raw stories that actually shape the human experience. And I love it when I can bring people in who are not only willing to go there, but have depth to speak about from their own experience and also live in a way that promotes I think, things around congruence that give us joy, freedom, and fulfillment. Our guest today believes in the power of the human spirit to overcome, to thrive, and to find deep joy. And here's the reality. She pours from her heart. We talk a lot about the power of the heart on this show, and she does it in a whole variety of mediums. She's a well-known and established author of multiple books. She runs companies as an entrepreneur to help many other people. She's been involved in multiple media experiences, but she's also a mother. She's a woman. She's a strength in this world. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Racheal Marie Martin. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to see what happens here.
Yeah, it's always a good time because I never know exactly where it goes. And here's the thing. What I know is that I don't typically prepare a lot of questions.
Nice.
And the reason is because I like to be very, very real in the conversation. Mm-hmm. There is one question that I ask every single guest, and it's after I do the introduction. And so it's, who are you in your words?
I am a decider. That's what I tell people now. I would have not said that 10 years ago, but I am a person that makes a decision, goes after the decision. And then beyond that, I'm a storyteller of the human experience.
Okay. So I love that answer on lots of levels.
Okay,
and
good.
There is a small percentage of people that actually answer that question with who they are instead of what they do. So I really appreciate the intentionality in your answer. Now, as a decider, you gave a little brief influence and understanding as to why that is what you identify as now, but what does it mean specifically for you to be a decider? And why was this an important part for you to integrate into your identity as who you are?
I would say that for most of my life, I was not a decider, or I was not a decision maker, or I didn't see that I was making decisions. And so I would say I felt like I was a waffler with stuff. And in the last couple of years, I actually was on a podcast and the individual called me out on it. And he says, you sound like you're a decision maker. And I thought, you know what? He's right, because I would have never gotten to this point if I wasn't a decision maker. And that shift in my identity was so powerful because for so long, I had told myself I wasn't a decision maker. And then I realized in order to get from poverty and where I was and not knowing what I was going to do to where I am now, I had to be a decision maker.
So I find a lot of power in the words that you just said. I tell people all the time that as little as 5 years ago, I believed that I was not a creative person. Now I'm a highly, highly, highly creative person. And anybody who knows me now knows that and how it gets represented in multiple areas. But again, it was a part of myself that I either didn't see or I'd shut down for many, many years for a variety of reasons. I appreciate how you talk about how it was reflected back to you and you received it. But I would like to understand in the narrative that used to exist around you not being a decision maker, what were the areas or patterns within your life that caused you to believe that you were not a decider even when you were?
The patterns for me was I adopted a role that I thought there were certain areas of my life where I could be a decision maker, where it came to being a homemaker, being at all of that. And my role, because I went through a really horrible divorce about 12 years ago, my role in that place was not the financial person, not the breadwinner, not any of that. And because I had adopted that role, I would default on decisions that were actually decisions that I should have stepped up and taken and gone after. But it was so ingrained in me that this was my spot. This was where I should be. I was operating under that paradigm. And once I decided, you know what, no, I can't default on my own story. I started making decisions in places that I hadn't for so long. And that was unbelievably powerful to see the results of when you make a decision, things actually change.
Yeah, they do. Do I have permission to reflect something back to you just real quick about the language that I picked up on in
yes,
that? Okay.
You do. I love this. This is good.
I'm a big believer that feedback is permission based. And so even though I told you I might challenge you throughout the show, I just wanted to make sure we're still on the same page.
I'm good.
Okay, cool. So you said decisions that you should have made. Mm-hmm. Should is a shame-based word. It implies whoever you are and whatever you're doing, it's not good enough. And so all I'm highlighting is the nuance of the fact that even the word choice and identification of it can lower your frequency. But that tells me as well that there are still areas that you have a little bit of shame around the decisions that you could have made back then, not that you necessarily should have made. And I don't know if that resonates, but.
Well, I'm going to challenge you on that too, because we're in it. I love that idea. I mean, I believe that should is a shame-based word, but I also believe that there are places in my life where you should do something, where it's unequivocally, I'm supposed to take care of it, where without doing it, I'm defaulting, I'm not being responsible. And for me, in that instance, there wasn't any shame. It was really, actually, I needed to do that. And maybe I could have used the word need in that spot. But sometimes I think that we give ourselves a pass, like, don't be so hard. Don't put that layer of shame on it. Or for myself, I was the victim of circumstances. And when you're the victim, that's what I told myself. Yep. And when you do that, then you allow shame to creep in. Yep. And I absolutely was critical that I did it. So I also see that I'm very aware of that word, but I also don't want to eliminate the small percentage of times where that word is actually essential.
So I'm happy that you challenged it back, because I do agree there are some situations where it's the only word, and it's because of the limited elements of our language, to be perfectly honest. And I think that that's where I still struggle with that as well, because even in the example that you gave, what comes to me is like, no, it was your choice to make. You just didn't make it because you didn't feel you had the permission to do so. Right. And so even the nuance of even putting a little more words to it explains the situation that it was your decision. You didn't feel as the victim that you had the permission. Right. And so could you or would you have made the decision if you were not a victim? The answer is likely yes.
Right. Well, and I didn't know that I was under the layer of victim in that. I didn't know, because it's that whole gaslighting thing when you don't know. And I finally had a friend that came to me and she said, could you just explain your whole life? Could you just talk about your day? And then she would stop me and she would say, I just want you to know that's not normal. Whatever the context of normal is, we could go into that word too. Yeah, totally. But she was such a truth teller that when you're in a fog that deep, sometimes you don't realize that you're in that fog. And for her, it was this, for me, it was basically a shedding of boxes and identities that I had to get me to this spot.
So I talk about that all the time. I believe that we acquire pain in our lives, and for every layer of pain we acquire, we create an associated layer of armor. And so it's a process of healing those layers of pain and shedding those layers of armor to get back to the core of who we are. Right. And that's right. And I sit here in a position that I carried deep shame. I carried deep anger. I was blind and unconscious to the ways it was showing up in my life, the ripple effects of damage it was creating. But what you also spoke to is something that I really want to bring some highlight and some focus on, because there is a lot of toxic shame around women and mothers. And there's a lot of women who lose their identity when they decide that they're going to stay home to be a homemaker, a mother, a caretaker, right? And all of the implications of what that can suggest, right? The lack of feeling of value because I'm not contributing monetarily, even though you're contributing so much into the house. These are narratives that many, many, many women feel. And there's a lot of masculine energy that can overtake, have control, anger, and create environments that only further perpetuate that feeling that the woman might not have a voice or might not have permission in their voice. And so this is an area that even my own marriage has faced. I have a huge energy and a big, big voice and a big tone. And I know all of these things. And so if I'm not very intentional to have a gentle strength in every environment, I can steamroll. I can easily take over. And it's easy for my wife, who is not the one in the forefront, to just fall into the shadow. And I'm the one that often has to remind her to shine the light, or I've got to shine it on her to let her see it. But the reality of it is you spoke truth to a dynamic that I would say a huge, huge percentage of our population of married women has or does actively experience. So can you unpack it a little bit further for us and help us understand, when did the reality that your circumstance was causing you to be a victim and had taken away power in your voice? When did you realize it? And what was the path forward for you to reclaim it?
So, it's always interesting because people, let's say, somebody that goes through a divorce, and I remind people that you're seeing the splash moment, the giant moment, and you're forgetting that there's probably been years and years of build up to that spot. And that's why it's shocking to everybody. That's why people are like, oh, I don't know it. That's why it gets labeled, oh, is she going through a crisis or all of that? For myself, I would say it was 5 years before my divorce, back over a decade ago, that I started to realize there's something not right. And not even that it wasn't right. We were in such a bad position financially, but I couldn't seem to, I had mistaken worth with taking care of the finances in some ways. If I'm good enough and I do everything in the house to make everything perfect, quote unquote, then the financial part will get fixed. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And during that time, I started writing online, and I actually earned some money. And you would have thought that the process of making money would have been celebrated because we were a team. You would have thought we were a team, but instead it was a threat. And I started to realize, oh my gosh, what is happening here? I'm bringing in money. Why am I getting such pushback? And the more successful I got, the only way I can describe it, the noose on my neck at home got tighter and tighter and tighter. And nothing can make that. I mean, when you can't feel like you can't breathe, which was my coping mechanism since I was a child, I'd get all agitated, I'd hyperventilate, and I was living in that. And I just became determined, I have got to change this for my children. And that was the main fire for me, was I cannot bring this pattern generationally to them. I can't have them go, mom was she was a great mom, because I was pretty darn good because I was trying to make things perfect for everything at that part. But I was really bad at taking care of myself, terrible at my own story. And it broke me to think that they would see me as, she was a good mom, but she was miserable. She was bitter. And I didn't want that.
So thank you. Thank you for taking us there. Again, even in my own story, hear some of what we experienced through what you shared. I mean, that was one of those moments where I had a hidden subliminal anger that was coming out in little moments that I wasn't aware of. And it was when my wife decided that she was no longer going to accept that for our children, that everything changed. And she was able to communicate in a way that I was able to hear, and fortunately was given a gift to respond instead of react in that moment and actually create repair together. Right. But what you're talking about is a blessing and a curse, because what's also really interesting is that many women will not stand up into their own voice to advocate for themselves, but they will for someone else, like their children. And so the motivation to get you going was for your kids. At what point did it become about you also?
I would say it was also for me. I knew I had the awareness that I couldn't survive it. I could not survive this existence. I could feel myself withering away. And in the knowing that I couldn't survive it, I had this moment where I was driving. I lived in Minnesota, and I was driving down a road, and it was winter, and it's flat, and the snow was whipping across the road where you can't see the road as well. And I remember realizing that I was skirting the line in my life. I was like the road, and the road was blurred, and that I had convinced myself that when things got fixed, then I would go pursue my dreams. So I would kind of ignore the joy part. I was like, well, I could do that. And the other side was bitterness. And I realized it was like I got smacked in the face, that if I didn't choose to go the path of finding joy, fighting for my life, I would be bitter, and I would end up that person. And the realization that my shot at earthly life this time was that I would be bitter, it was devastating. And that was the moment. That was like a stake in the ground where I'm not going back.
Well, and here's the other reality, is that not choosing is still a choice.
Correct.
And so you took a really, really active stance to make this happen. You know, I just was blessed and fortunate enough to be a part of a women's only mastermind last Friday and to do one of the things that I do best, which is hot seat coaching and really helping kind of reflect some life back into people. And there was a woman in the seat who's been married for 31 years who has felt a shift in the feminine masculine energies. And it was a lot of the dynamics where she was not the breadwinner. She was the stay-at-home person. And all of a sudden her real estate business took off and her husband's world started to decline. And even the narrative that took place and what she was attempting and communicating is that she was doing everything in her power to give her husband his voice back, his role back.
Right.
And I just reflected back to her that that's also not her responsibility.
Right.
And the fact that she shines does not mean that him suffering is her fault. He's made choices that's put him in the same dynamics and positions. And if that's a dynamic that threats, which is what you talked about in your own marriage, the more success you got, the more threat it became in your relationship. And so you are the author of multiple books, but two that really stand out that I was really excited just to even see the titles on is The Brave Art of Motherhood and Mom Enough. Okay. Mom shaming is active and freaking prevalent, right? Right. And it doesn't seem like women can win no matter which direction they turn because everybody's got an opinion and it's always seeming like they're doing it in a way that's not enough. So the intentionality of your titles tell me everything. And again, I'm speaking around the topics from my only understanding from as much as I can understand and grasp in a male body, right? Witnessing it and communicating with many other women that I have context and understanding with. But why did you write these two books? And what do you believe are the greatest patterns that you've witnessed either through your own experience or through the thousands of women that you've impacted that keep women trapped and not being able to step into being enough?
So what's interesting about that, so I appreciate that you brought those up. The first book, Brave Art of Motherhood, was really about identifying that cycle that you're in, whatever it may be, and getting out. How do you do that while being a mom? Because that most self-help books out there, for me, didn't account for, I've got a toddler, I've got kids, I've got expectations, I've got roles. And I used all of those as the excuses. I said, these are kind of the excuses we give ourselves that we can't do something. There may be baggage that we carry or whatever. So that book was about breaking the cycle and doing the hard stuff so that you can live your authentic life. And then Mom Enough, which was really a collection of these letters that I had written over a decade online. And it was all these letters to moms. But when I look back, I was writing to myself. One of the questions people ask me often, especially now, because I don't even know if you know about my third book, but
I do. Yeah, I just haven't brought it back yet. Yeah.
Yeah. Which actually you're going to see the pattern that goes through it. One of the questions I get asked all the time is, what letter's your favorite? And I've had many that have gone viral. And this was one, but not like the uber viral ones. Maybe, I guess in perspective, it had like 600,000 shares, but
it's a lot.
It's a lot. I mean, but I've had some that are millions. So, but it's still in the category.
I totally understand. I get it. It's all about perspective. Totally.
It is. And this letter was called Dear Mom, You're Stronger Than You Think. And it was not about the crazy giant moments. It was, you're stronger when you tuck your toddler in bed after the worst day of your life, or all these moments that we dismiss because moms will say it's no big deal. I'm just a mom, just a mom. And it was about those moments and how much strength it takes and how powerful that strength is, because sometimes moms feel like we don't do enough. We don't have the strength. We can't change things. And yet you're right. Our best friends, we'll talk to our best friends like, you go, girl, you can do anything. And then we talk to ourselves totally different. So, I
witnessed that in my own house. It's something that my wife has even talked about on our own podcast here. It's a real thing that, no matter how good, how strong, how capable, there's just a lot of forces that are trying to convince women otherwise. Right. And as a husband of a strong, powerful, intelligent, and capable woman who I have the privilege of walking alongside, and the father of a daughter, it's extremely important to me that we can have conversations like this with women, not just in spaces for women, but for all parties to hear, because it truly, truly is important to me. And it's a sad thing, and I don't mean this politically, that my daughter has less rights in many parts of this country than my wife did at her same age. right? Like in a time when we need more feminine voices, we're finding more fear and threat that I think is trying to suppress certain feminine voices. And so I'd love to understand what has been your dynamic as you've continued to step in, have these things go viral. Like, what are the dynamics that you're seeing around the broader social implications towards women? And what do you see as kind of this future path in these next few years to help more women step into their power?
So I give this analogy often because I truly do believe that is as someone that has the honor. And I just think what a gift that I get to be the curator of that page. There's over 1 million women that are there. And over the years, the writings have reached millions and millions. And I'm so grateful, first of all. But I often remind people of several things is that there's no fighting really on my page because I don't have time for that. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to sit there. We're going to love the woman across the table. And the reason I tell them that this is the way it's going to go is because when we don't have the conversation and when we have the fighting, we are doing a disservice to the thousands of years of where women have fought to get to the very place where we are. I mean, I will stand in front of women and I will remind them that every generations before us, our grandmothers, their mothers, their grandmothers would have dreamed to have this opportunity to have a microphone in hand and to talk this freely. And for us to bring it down with ridiculous fighting over ridiculous stuff is a disservice. We can have a conversation. It doesn't even mean we have to agree on everything, but we can sit at the same table and respect the person sitting across. So because of that, and because I hope to inspire women to do that, my hope is that we continue to spread that, is to really appreciate this online venue, this opportunity you and I are having to have a discussion without fear about having the discussion, which for most of history, there was fear. And so that's why I'm honored to do this, to meet and to chat, because I am very aware of the gift that we have with this online platform.
Yeah, I love the idea of no fighting. It's something that we hold very, very strong in every community that we lead, whether it's our mastermind, our community, our retreats, because the reality of it is fighting always takes us further away from what both parties actually want.
Right.
Right. It's to me, it's what forces the divisiveness. It's what forces the black and white and zero sum game thinking. It's what forces hierarchy, when in reality, the gift is often in the gray area. And it's okay if we're confident and clear enough in who we are to have civil discourse and conversation and challenge and still know that we're going to be okay. Right. And that's at the ultimate area, is that so many of us are protecting what we believe we need to protect, but it also disconnects us from who we are and what we want and from each other.
When you protect it so tightly, you don't allow yourself the space to wonder about somebody else's their experience. And in the wondering, it doesn't even mean you have to say, oh, I'm going to shift, I'm going to agree, but you're also giving that person the freedom to share a perspective. And I don't want to be so narrow thinking that I can't drop my own whatever ego to hear somebody else's perspective.
I love that. I mean, I think that the greatest skill sets for leaders of groups of people, whether it's women or not, is the ability to be objective, non-judgmental, and to create emotionally safe spaces. And I believe that if those things can exist, then the reality and opportunity for us to come together is there. And that's what I'm witnessing, even in the way that you communicate, in what you've done and what you're curating and what you continue to build. You said something earlier that it resonated deeply, because few people I hear use this word, but I use it often. And it's around the human experience, right? Like, I have a definition to me as to what that means. But I also love this concept of perspective, and I love the intentionality you have in words. Would you describe and define what the human experience means to you, and where is our greatest opportunity for improving our collective human experience?
Well, there's a quote about we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and I heard it 25 years ago. I'm a magnet that's very worn on my fridge now. But for me, the human experience is the very tiny blip in the timeline that we get to be on this planet. And it's an opportunity. It's a blessing. It's a gift. I remember hearing someone speak about if all of time was like a rope between his fingers, it was in San Diego to Japan, that our time, if you could quantify time in that way, that our lifetime you couldn't even see it between his two fingers. It's so small. And it just brought the perspective of, do you know what? I don't want to waste this experience. And we all have this moment in time where we get to experience life in this way. And for me, it's being grateful for it. It's knowing that the time that we have, that was another thing I've resonated with so much, is we all have the gift of time, but nobody knows how much of it you have. And so there's that tension in there, like with it. And my goal, my heart is to illuminate that there can be a lot of stuff in your human experience on this side of the timeline, if that's your past, but it doesn't need to dictate what you do on this side of your timeline in your future. And I just really want to spark that hope for people to wake up alive and curious and wondering and brave, and to live with kindness and joy.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the lived experience is where it really comes together. Right. Because I think there's a lot of people who are alive who don't ever live. And,
exactly.
That's, I think, a big gap. And I think that, it's even interesting because I used to have described myself as having to push the limits of death just to feel alive. Right. The extremes had to be so strong just to get me to ground and center in that space. Now, for perspective, because I don't know if you knew this or saw this, but I also have had like extreme things happen. I was run over by a truck. My left arm was torn from my body, reattached. So like my rush and adrenaline thresholds are not normal.
Right.
And that's okay. But why I say that is it's a beautiful thing because it is about the lived experience and it is about the presence.
Right.
It's also interesting though to hear you talk about time in the way that you do, because it is beautiful. And the way you communicate about it is from such a place of gratitude and surrender, which is beautiful. But then when asked what your biggest problem in life or business was, it was not enough time. So those don't seem congruent with the way I heard you speak about it. So again, this is the human reality, is that we are spiritual beings in a human body that causes us to have conflict sometimes. But can you talk about that lack of congruence, and in the way that you speak about time so beautifully, why is it also your biggest problem?
So I love that you use the word congruence, because I have gravitated to the word congruence forever, because I think that so many of us don't live in congruence with who we are created to be.
Yep.
And time is one of those places when you're trying to navigate the spiritual experience of time with the human experience of time, because I think it's a very different thing. When you're in the human experience, there's paradigms and clocks and deadlines and all of that, where the human brain is like, you don't have enough time. But if you can step back and see it from a bigger perspective, that there is enough time. It's just the way that we use time. And so for myself, I know that when I get caught up in the deadlines, which I still experience. I knew that you and I were going to meet at 11:30. I'm conscious of it. I respect your time. I'm going to be there. What ends up happening is that feeling of not enough time encroaches, because my part of me wishes, wow, I wish there was more than 24 hours a day. And in that moment is the moment I don't appreciate the 24 hours I'm given. And that's the shift for me is, no, you know what? Those 24 hours, it's a blessing. And when I think not enough, I'm not grateful that I get 24 hours, versus the shift in perspective is, what am I going to do with these 24 hours? Yeah.
I mean, it's scarcity versus abundance as well.
Yes.
Right. It's just a perspective, because it's a zero sum game. Because if we have not enough time, that implies that it's running out. Right. Versus what can we do with it now? I also appreciate how you speak about that, because I do believe that the greater level of congruence we have to who we're intended to be and who we're becoming, the more we actually allow ourselves to compress and manipulate time.
Oh, yeah,
because we are in places of less resistance, less interference. We can allow flow. Abundance can exist. Gravity is there. Right. And so that's like what's really interesting to me about just this dynamic and concept of time is I fully accept and agree with everything you said, by the way. And do I myself still struggle with the concept of time? Yeah, in many ways. Right. And here's the funny thing. I've surrendered so much to the man-made construct of time. I'm not even allowed to touch my own calendar anymore because I screw it up every time. Right. And I used to be such a control freak that it was like totally dialed and I had it set. Right. But I can operate on a calendar, but I can't see time in the same linear sense when I'm scheduling something, right? Same thing with memories. Like things might seem like they were yesterday or 30 years apart, and they could have been yesterday. Right. And so this perception of time is also a reality that I think is something that we, between our spiritual and human selves, have to be thoughtful in how do we regulate that. You spoke a little bit to that, but when those voices come in for you in your human experience, right? What is your spiritual voice speaking to try to modify or refine that feeling in your body that the human experience gives you?
Well, I think you have to back it up too. What you were saying something about time is you need to understand how you see time, because some of us see time in very different ways. Some of us, it is a linear timeline. But for myself, even though I can see the linear thread, if I close my eyes and saw time, it's more like a web in front of me where all these things are connected. And that connectedness is what gives me sometimes the pressure, because I say, oh, what about this? What about that? What about that? You know, all of that. But the spiritual part, the part with seeing time in a different way, it's more of a feeling versus the voices that are happening. It's the moment where I just have to stop and catch my breath. I do. People have asked me what's the greatest thing that I do for myself every day. And I tell them it's the ability to pause. Like, for instance, before you and I even got on our conversation, it was 11:29. And I could have just come on, hit on and said hello, but I'm carrying with me everything that I had this morning. And I have chosen to stop, to take the breath, to set down what doesn't need to come into the conversation so that we can meet and have a conversation without all the baggage that doesn't need to be there. And that's what helps me understand the perspective of time. It's being willing to almost step out of the construct for a little bit and then reinsert myself.
I love how you described that. And that's what I experienced with you from the second you showed up, is your presence. I'm also a big fan of intentionally releasing things that don't serve us, walking into different environments and putting ourselves in positions so that we can be so highly present. In fact, that's one of the things I struggle with. Like, I'm really bad at certain messages, getting back to people. Because if I travel, right, like I was speaking in 2 different cities and coaching and doing things last week. Well, for 3 or 4 days, I'm so highly present in what I'm doing that everything else seemingly just stands still, even though the normal passing of time can take place. So I love how you described that and kind of plugging yourself in and out of that linear element that we measure. I feel so much alignment with you, and I love, you just have such a beautiful nuance to the way that you communicate topics. And I love that, because your language makes these concepts accessible to portions of our population that my language never will, or other people's language never will. And it's a really beautiful and refined way that you deliver it. That's not polished, because it's not fake. It's real. It's raw. And you can tell that it comes from lived experience. You've done a lot of media interviews, and you communicated this early on, right? As someone who wasn't in a position to be a decider, who wasn't owning and fully expressing her voice. And you used writing as a way, which many women or people who felt their voices suppressed have used to find a way to escape and put their voice into the world, right? It's a great medium for all of that. But I'd like to really unpack the process in the last 12 to 15 years of you rediscovering your voice. And what are the reps that you've taken to refine your voice to ensure that you've got clarity and congruence in it?
So the congruence, I don't know if you ever watched Seinfeld, but there was an episode where I believe it was George. He got all worried about his 2 worlds colliding. And he had his Jerry world and his dating world, and he didn't want the worlds to collide. And I think that many of us have that experience of, we can't have the worlds colliding. And for me, the congruency in finding my voice was that if you and I were to meet and have coffee here in Nashville, you would say you're exactly what I expected from what you wrote and what you write. And that means the most to me, is when readers, I was just in San Francisco and they hug, and it's like we know each other and I'm not a stranger to them, because the world's, there's no collision there. I try to show up the way I write. So for me, finding my voice was in some ways just allowing the truths that I felt in my heart and in my soul to trust myself enough to write them. And one of the greatest compliments that I ever get is, how did you know what was in my head? How did you know you're writing exactly what I think, but I didn't know how to verbalize? And I'm so just grateful for that because I know that I can get out of that flow, trying to meet metrics, trying to do stuff, and then it's not as authentic.
Yeah.
But when I just allow that part to happen and I trust this is what it's supposed to be, then amazing things can happen. And it creates community. It creates the permission in somebody else's life to be vulnerable.
Again, the more we talk, the more depth in our congruence I feel. It is cool. Beautiful what you just said. My reason for existence is to allow my truth to give others permission to live theirs.
Oh, that's powerful.
I believe that even to what you just spoke about, I'll give a framework that'll help everybody else listening to receive this as well. But I like to say that we suffer in 4 places. Mm-hmm. It's the things that are left unsaid, the things that we lack permission to feel or say, the things we lack the words to articulate or understand, or the things that are left undone. What I love so much about what you're speaking to, and this is similarly reflected back to me, is that whether I'm on social media, I'm on a podcast, I meet someone in person, they come to our retreats, they see me with my family, I'm the same person. Right. I'm the same person, which establishes trust because it is just real. It's not fabricated by container. It's who am I in those roles in those containers, but who I am doesn't change.
Right.
And so what I do often and what you've done through your writing, you're doing through your speaking, you're doing through these interviews, doing through all these things is, again, every time you speak your truth, you alleviate and speak truth into the world, and you're doing on your own stories that alleviates the suffering for yourself. And you're giving people permission to feel and say things they wouldn't have without you, and words to articulate and understand it in a way that wouldn't have existed without the words you gave them to access the concept. And so it's really beautiful to witness even the way you communicate about how you do this and finding your voice, because it is so real and authentic, and you are a great, strong model. What do you believe are the greatest opportunities, whether it be women, young girls, or men, or any other label that we want to put in front of something? Mm-hmm. What do you think is the greatest opportunity for people to explore and refine and find their own voices?
It starts with being willing to wonder again. I really believe that wondering is a lost art. If you have little children, they wonder about everything. I wonder why this. I wonder why the sky is blue. I wonder if I can do this. And as we get older, wondering is deemed impractical. It's deemed, oh, you're daydreaming now. Don't daydream so much. Or, we want linear tasks from A to B to get to C and all of that. And wondering allows us to find our voice, because it allows us also to say, I wonder why I believe that to be true. I wonder why am I doing this, that I've always done this. But what if I do something different? What if I go home another way around the block? And when you wonder, it's like that conversation we were having about community. It allows your soul, your heart to have a voice versus the logical part of your brain all the time. And in that voice can emerge, and it can emerge. You still have like, what if people reject me, or all those thoughts, but you wonder, well, why are you worried about people rejecting you? Where did you start to unpack that a little bit? And then often it comes down to those core fears. I don't want to be alone. I'm not loved. I'm not enough. And then you have that, then you have something you can work with, and then you can start to give your voice. It's like permission. Yeah, your voice needs to be heard.
Well, and really, even what you just described too was a systematic process of helping people start to get to the root of what they're protecting in the first place. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, what is it that they don't want to feel or be seen behind that criticism or that action? And again, it's that whole concept that the second we protect ourselves, we disconnect ourselves. So I'm a big believer that there's no final destination, just constant evolution of self, right? Like I am very, very evolved, and I'm as self-actualized as I can be in this moment. Right. But I also know there's more coming. There's more layers. There's more things I can't even anticipate. Right. And so we're always going through these layers of understanding. So I just would love to understand for you where, if you have conscious awareness to it, are you still protecting yourself?
In the places of being seen, I think I worry about, that if I'm too much in that way, because as a little girl, I was often told you're too sensitive, which I have written a counterpoint to, that my very thing that I was told you should be quiet about is the very superpower that allows me to write what I'm doing. But I still have that every once in a while. It's like, it's on the shoulder. I can hear it like, oh, don't get too big, or don't be that, or don't be so braggadocious, or all of that. I was taught this definition of humble, be that way, but that definition of humble is very antithetical to what it really means. And when you allow yourself to step into your own light and into your story and to shine, it's that permission. You spread hope, you spread opportunity. And I've known that sometimes I can tend to put that little wall up a little bit because of fear, rejection, whatever it may be. And it goes back to a lot of those stories and narratives I was told as a kid.
The thing I want to also reflect back to you that you may already know, but I resonate deeply with even how you just described that, because I've always been too much, too big, live too big. And I often even joke that I'm best in bite-sized pieces, which is still true, right? Like I get that. Like I fry people because I know my energy and my presence, and it is what it is. Like I'm accepting that now. However, what I didn't realize for a very long time is that shame has two talk tracks. It's I'm not worthy and I'm not good enough. And I'd be lying if I told you I didn't have moments there, but that was never my predominant narrative. It was always when I shut that down and shut up in the arena, it's who do you think you are? Who do you think you are to live so big? Who do you think you are to go after those things? Who do you think you are to raise all this money? Who do you think you are? Blah, 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 whatever the narratives are, right? And so why I bring that up is because you're right. You do understand the elements and the support and what was conditioned into you and what you were told and what your narratives were. But I think that's what I was just trying to reflect, is also to allow you to attach that to the shame frequency so that you can recognize how to elevate yourself beyond it. Because my friend, I've only known you for 45 minutes, but I can promise you that the brighter you shine your light, the bigger you live, the more people you're giving permission to live however big they can. And so every time you shut yourself off there, even if it's coming from a real place of needing to protect, you're doing your broader mission of providing hope for many as a voice, and the hope for many a disservice. And so if you can remember that it's only the shame, it's not just the narratives, it's only the shame that's tried to trap you into this box based on who the world told you to be instead of who you really are, then the reality of it is every time you step over that limit on the edge of the box, you're showing other people how to do the same.
I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that. It got me a little bit emotional there. So I really, really appreciate that, because I intuitively in my soul, I know it's that part of you that just knows what he's saying. He is speaking truth to you right now. And one of the things that I value are truth tellers, are the people that are willing to go, I'm going to tell you this, even though it might make you a little bit uncomfortable, because I believe in you and what you're saying. So I'm very grateful for your words.
I would be curious if you want to explore for just a second, because one of the things that I picked up on when you said that back is, and it's, I think what I picked up on, which is why I said it, is I had this sense that you have this intellectual understanding of where the sources came from in the narratives, but yet it's the emotional and the cellular memory that activates in those moments that you've not been able to completely align. Right. With those thoughts. And so it's where there's misalignment in our intellectual and emotional narratives that often creates that gap. Right. And so what I would be really curious about is, as I was saying that back to you, if you're willing to go there, and if not, we can change the topic. I'm okay. But if you're willing to go there, you say it resonated at like a visceral soul level. Right. What specifically did you feel? I just feel, well, I mean, I have memories come up. One of my first memories was being left alone. So it's on that visceral level of what if I get whatever, quote unquote, too big and people reject me and I'm alone. And it's that feeling of aloneness. And on the visceral level, I knew, but there's this part that's like, that is not true. Why do you believe that? Why, whatever, believe that. And it's almost loving the part that sees that it's not truth. Because I think when you deny it, when you push away whatever you're feeling, you're just shoving it down. It's just down. You're shoving it down. And so for me, it's working through that, having the moments when someone like you says, hey, I noticed that. And instead of going, no, you didn't, I don't have time for it, going, you know what? There is truth there. And I love my story and I love this timeline and I love what I feel like I'm called to do. And therefore I'm willing to go there and unpack it further. Yeah. Well, I also resonate because much of my life, I could be in a room surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. Right. And I'm used to being the only one in many rooms. Right. And so I recognize what that can also mean and translate to in terms of other people who have that shared experience of being the only one in every room they walk into. Right. However they want to identify that. And what I also recognized and realized, at least in my own trajectory, is it was only in the places that I was protecting myself because I was afraid to be alone, that I was actually disconnecting myself to guarantee that I never would be.
Oh,
and so now I have the ability to be alone and I'm never lonely. Mm-hmm. But I think that's also what I'm trying to highlight back to you is if that is really the root fear of like, I'm going to be isolated, I'm going to be overlooked, I'm not going to be left alone, I'm not going to be there. I also want to reflect back to you what you talked to me about in terms of helping others find the power of their voice by sharing yours and what it does for community and connection. Mm-hmm. I believe the more authentically you live and the more truth that you speak, doing it from a vibration and frequency that's authentically yours, the more people you attract and the more you guarantee you will never be alone.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. I had an experience in life of, I would say the first time in my life where I was disconnected and very alone, not on the frequency, that part of it, but it was the first time I went to Haiti. It was in 2013. And it was just about right before my divorce where I said enough is enough. But that experience there is, I flew there. I got to Port-au-Prince. I got picked up. I didn't know I barely knew anybody. I was alone. Everybody else that pretty much goes there goes with a group of people. And I was going to meet somebody because I was going to document behind the scenes of what it takes to run a mission trip there. And that first night, they bring me to this kind of space within a hotel, I guess, within Port-au-Prince that was fully armed and men were walking around with machine guns and all of that. And I remember, and my phone didn't work, feeling so unbelievably alone and having to go through this experience of making it through. And it seems like, what would that be? But it was just my whole life had been connected with people and my friends and family. And I didn't. And that experience of letting myself actually feel it without judging it. Yes. And then getting to the other side was powerful.
I often talk about you need to witness and not judge. Mm-hmm. Right? Sometimes people just need to observe so they can raise their level of awareness that's not paired with judgment. Because as soon as judgment kicks in, growth and opportunity go out the window. Amen. I love that you're like, I need to sit with it. I need to feel it. I need to process it and go through that. I love that. And I just think it's so beautiful. I do want to, couple things as we kind of bring this a little bit more towards a close. I've got a few more questions for you that are just popping in my head. Where did your love for disc golf come from?
Can I put it on the pandemic?
You can blame it.
Actually, if you go look at a chart, the popularity of disc golf in the United States spiked during COVID because
did it really?
It did because nobody could. We couldn't do anything, but you could go outside. Yeah. And so my husband, because I'm remarried, a couple of years ago, somebody had given him discs for disc golf. And so he said one day to the kids, let's go do this because we're all stir crazy. And now I'm like, hey, can we go play disc golf again? Because I love it. I know I have the little stance for the putting, the whole thing. But I like it because there's two things with it. The more you practice the 10,000 hour rule, the better. Obviously, I can chuck that disc. But there's also variability every time. Wind, things change, and then you're outside. So I just love it.
Yeah, I love that. I played disc golf when I was in high school with a math teacher that I had who was like crazy into it. He was a single man, like didn't have, and he like lived playing disc golf when he wasn't teaching math. And I would go out with him and play, and it was fun. Yeah, and it was just like a different experience. And to your point, I'm one of those that like anything physical, I like to challenge and just see what's possible. And whether I'm good or not, it doesn't matter. It's just like, let's see what this feels like and how do we do this. You said earlier something that was extremely powerful, and we had a moment in conversation around it, but it was around the choice that you made because of your kids. Mm-hmm. And what you said, and I don't remember the exact words, but it was something along the lines of you didn't ever want your kids to look at you in a way that was like you didn't do everything you could and in a way that wasn't going to sacrifice you. Mm-hmm. Did I sort of get that correct?
I didn't want them to see that I was bitter. Like I was great. Okay. I was so good for them. But for me, I was hollow. And I give the example, I'm going to tell you, my parents paid a lot of money for me to play the piano growing up. They sat next to me. They sat at recitals. They did that. I eventually learned to love to play the piano. And then for many years, I didn't play the piano. And now we have a piano and my kids love it when I play the piano. because it's not being a mom, it's not being an entrepreneur, it's me. They get to experience me, and they get to experience me through music and the expressions and what it creates in the house. And that's what I want my kids to remember.
So that was where I was going to go with it, is you made an intentional choice 12 years ago to ensure they never saw you as bitter. And you gave an example with piano and music, which, by the way, I think is beautiful. But I'm going to ask you to expand on that a little bit further. Yes. Okay. If you were very clear on what you didn't want your kids to see, right? What do your kids see today? And what would they say about you?
This makes me emotional. I have a daughter that wrote a letter about me when she was in high school. And this is my daughter that is in the U.S. Space Force right now. So she's a pretty amazing person. And she wrote about how so many people didn't know what I was doing, but she could see that in it all, that I was fighting for my own heart, and in the fighting for my own heart and my story, that I was fighting for them and teaching them that you are worthy of, basically, like you and I talked about, living your life alive and full of vibrancy. And it's in my files upstairs.
You gave me chills. That just made literal chills through my entire body. That's amazing. I did notice the progression in the titles of your book, and I'm happy that you were able to speak to that. But I was intentionally leaving the last for last. Okay. Because I heard breaking the patterns, right? Yep. We've got to break the patterns. Then we have to start to fill the void by becoming enough. And then it's stepping into the light, and, as you call it, getting your spark back. Yep. So could you talk about, and really, I know you hinted at the progression of it, but maybe talk about the intentional progression of the books. And in this latest release, what is your intent, and what are people going to get out of reading it? So this book is super personal for me. Well, actually, they all are, because I'm not one that can just churn out books. I have to know it's almost divinely timed for me to write it. And this one, it's about living your life alive. I really believe, people ask me, what's your spark? And your spark, it's your soul. It's your human experience. It's the part of you. No matter if you think it's gone, it's still there, because as long as you're breathing, you have this spark. And I went through an experience in my own life where I had broken the cycle, knew I was enough. And then all of a sudden I thought, well, now what? And it terrified me. I was like, I recognized the person staring back at me in the mirror, but I don't know her as much anymore. The stuff that I had resolved didn't define me. And I didn't want it to be like, she's a fighter. She's dealing with, I didn't want that narrative. And so I went on my own journey of getting my spark back, which led to, because I'm transparent and write about it, readers writing in saying, well, how do I get my spark back? And that is unbelievably powerful, because nobody said a spark. It was always my spark, which means they inherently know it's one, they each have one, and it's not universal. It's individual to them. And the word back means, you had it. Little kids will fight over a toy taken away with such determination. And I wanted to equip and empower others to see that's what you do. When you go all in on your life, you have that determination, you have that grace, and you can deal with the stuff on the part of your timeline here without it having to be something that drags you down on this part of your timeline, the forward part. Yeah, I'm really big into understanding the light versus the shadows, and right, the things that light us up, the things that cause us to hide. And I often give an analogy too, that it's like, once you become the light bulb, there is no shadow. Right. Well, where there's light, there's no darkness. Bingo. So, and one particle of light can overtake a million particles of darkness, which is insane when you actually think about the statistics around this. And so I really like the language around spark, because it's a spark. It's a visceral drive. It's something that we feel at a cellular level. It's visceral, and we know. And so what is your spark? It's doing this. It's being a voice of encouragement for others. But for me, it's living unapologetic as me, showing up as me, being that voice, be doing things that I thought I would say no to before, but actually giving myself permission to say yes. You know what? I'm going to try. And that's what lights me up, is just being able to use this experience on this planet right now to be joy, to be that what I thought I was going to seek, and to inspire others to do the same. Yeah. What I also picked up on in your language, which I really have to just say to close a loop, is that you want to be unapologetically you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so two things come to mind for me in that when I hear you say that. To be unapologetically you, I am not hearing it from an energy of saying, fuck the world, fuck this. Like, I don't give a shit what anybody thinks.
Right.
It's to own all of you, but also do it in a way that doesn't create damage or separation.
Right.
Which is a very important piece because it's ingrained in every other part of your answer. But to come full circle back to that area that you are still protecting yourself,
mm-hmm.
if you're unapologetically you, then you'll never be alone.
Ah, interesting. You're very good. That's very good. Yeah.
So I appreciate everything that you've said today, your willingness, your vulnerability, your stories of truth, the way that you show up and the way that you communicate. And I even though I feel like it's so clear and strong in all of the narratives that you've said, if you were to speak one point
mm-hmm.
that you want the audience to be crystal clear on, that they take away from this show, mm-hmm. or that they remember for a long time, like the quotes you remember and can reflect back to from 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What is it?
You are more than enough and worthy of living with your spark fully alive.
Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Well, we all saw Racheal jump in and actually flip the lid on her own stories to talk about the narratives that created patterns of her losing her voice, feeling as if she didn't have the permission, even though in moments she felt that she should. It's also the distinction and understanding that should, though largely a shame-based word, there are times when it still applies. And so it's the energy that's behind it. But if you pay attention to everything that she says, it's about allowing your spark to come to the surface, to be seen by the world and to be honored by you. But the only way to get there is to break the historical patterns, start to fill those gaps and voids with new patterns, memories, and beliefs, and then your spark can shine. It is going to require each and every one of you to flip open your lid and scan your can, but you can get where Racheal believes you can all be.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flippin' the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippinthelid.com. We'll see you there.